Let's go to the good side. Number 3. Good surprise number 3 of the college football season. I think happened last week. And it was that all of a sudden, we got a version of this Colorado Buffaloes team that we have never seen before. So the complete Colorado showed up, and now all of a sudden that is an incredible surprise in college football, and it's changing the dynamic of the Big 12. The defense has been a lot better. I thought that the defense played their best and most complete game against UCF. Their front has been terrific. Livingston, their defensive coordinator, has been tremendous. Their edges play hard. And then you've got this offense. And we all knew that they were going to be able to play offense. But here's the difference. Early in the season, Colorado was using a lot of what's called 10 personnel, which means 4 wide receivers on the field and only 1 back. And when you have 10 personnel on the field, it is very difficult to control the defense. You can't put them in conflict. It's very difficult to get anything from a misdirection going on, in particular in the backfield. So it's hard to control linebackers. It's hard to do anything other than zone run game because you don't have an ability to control the edge of the defense. Okay. And so they're sitting in 10 personnel, and Nebraska just beats them up. I mean, beats them up. And candidly, some other teams did too, but they won the football game. With 10 personnel, you don't have a tight end, which means the edges of the offensive line are tighter to the quarterback. So Shedeur had no time whatsoever. Those tackles were on an island. They were getting beat quickly. Then you go to UCF film, and you're like, hold on. This looks markedly different. And let me tell you what they did. I turned on that film against UCF, and all of a sudden, they're in 11 personnel. And they were in 11 personnel a lot. They went from like 80% 10 personnel, 1 back, 4 wide receivers, no tight ends, to about 80% 11 personnel, 1 back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. Now, you would say that the strength of their team is their wide receiver core, and I would agree with that. But just putting an H-back or a tight end on the field did wonders for the complexity and diversity of their offense. It did wonders. So you turn on the film against UCF, and now all of a sudden, the run game has some cross action. You can hold the edge by just spinning that H-back back, and he can just cut down the defensive end on one side, and you can run zone. You can also run counter and gap schemes because now you have a tight end to pull along with the guard. You're not trying to pull a guard and a tackle away from a side. You can't do that if you don't have width to the formation, width meaning at least a tight end, whether he's in line or just behind the tackle. A lot of technical talk to basically say like the diversity of run game and the ability to put the linebackers in conflict made Colorado's offense completely different and much more difficult to defend. We obviously saw what it did for the run game. And they were able to run some of those gap schemes and in particular get downhill, and they were able to run the ball as effectively as they have under Deion Sanders. So that was huge for them. That was huge. But it did something else as well. Because the tight end always was in a check protection mode, which means he's not just out on his route right away. They were still using a 6-man protection, but rather than the back come up and check the linebackers or be a check protection player, now the tight end was a check protection player, which means at least on that side, you have width to the offensive line. And that quick edge in terms of pressure on Shedeur was not happening. So Shedeur was able to just float towards that H-back, even if it's just a half a step, and even if it's just a half a beat or a beat in the pocket that they were gaining in time for him to throw, that was monumental, throwing the football down the field. And now those skill position players on the outside, they were winning. So everything changed just with a personnel change with Colorado. I firmly believe that they're going to lean heavily into this because even during the game against UCF, I will tell you, when they got out of 11 and went back to 10, didn't look as good. It did not look as good because there's no conflict on those players. You can't hold edges. You can't create width in pass protection. You can't create conflict on linebackers, all these different things. You can't run diversity of run game. It's usually just zone out of 10. Out of 11, you can run gap schemes and zone, all these different things. And it made them such a complete team. If they stick to that, they will be very difficult to beat in the Big 12. So number 3, good surprise in college football, a complete Colorado. and a big adjustment on that offensive side that made them very difficult to stop. Number 3, bad surprise. What happened to Kansas? So before the year, I was very big on Kansas. I think Lance Leipold is an outstanding coach. I think Daniels, their quarterback, when he was healthy, has been as effective as anybody in the sport. They were building something really special. And you look up and they're 1-4. 1-4. They won 9 games last year. They were number 22 in this year's preseason poll. Jalen Daniels back. That hasn't worked out. They're 0-4 against FBS teams. Their losses are to Illinois, UNLV, West Virginia, and TCU. And what we talked about before the season in the Big 12 has kind of panned out in terms of these losses to West Virginia and TCU. It's like there's not a huge margin between these teams. So you get the wrong guy injured, you don't play your best, and you can be beat. I think the Colorado UCF example last week, I mean, Colorado was plus 42 from the Vegas spread. That's a staggering amount. So Illinois beating Kansas sent them on this little bit of a downward spiral. Then a good UNLV team beats them. Then West Virginia gets them. Then TCU gets them. And you look up and they're 1-4 and haven't beaten an FBS team. They blew a fourth quarter lead against Illinois. They had a lead with 2 minutes to go against UNLV. They blew an 11-point lead against West Virginia and had a 24-21 lead in the second half against TCU. That's the margin. That's the margin we were talking about in the Big 12, and it just hasn't paid off for Kansas. And you just wonder, like Andy Kotelnicki leaving Kansas as an offensive coordinator and going up to Penn State, maybe that was just a bigger factor. But number 3, bad surprise has been Kansas so far, being 1-4. Number 2, good surprise. How about Tennessee putting themselves in a position where they are a legitimate national title contender? That's a great surprise. I think for everybody, not just Tennessee fans. Okay. The more teams that we have on the top echelon or tier in college football, the better, I think. And Tennessee, I had them number 18 in my preseason poll. I'm pleasantly surprised by what's going on with Tennessee. They have the number 1 scoring offense in the country. They've got the number 2 scoring defense in the country. So they're doing it on both sides of the ball. And candidly, I'm all in on Tennessee. And let me tell you why. Tennessee, to me, in their makeup, resembles last year's national champion. Now, not in every single area, but let me make a few of the tie-ins. Last year, Michigan was 14th in the team composite score. That means a measure of your talent across your entire roster. And last year's Michigan team was 14th in the country as far as most talented team in the country. And it just so happens that was one of the lowest composites that we've seen win a national title in a long time. We've seen these upper echelon teams, Georgia and Bama and these Clemson teams and LSU, their team composites were fairly high. And obviously so, because they recruited so well. So this Michigan team was a bit of an anomaly. But what did they have? They had a deep, great defense, number 1, and the most talented player on their composite list was their quarterback. J.J. McCarthy was the highest rated player that Michigan had. So they had a quarterback that could elevate them over the X's and O's. And actually, J.J. did that. Nobody in college football converted more 3rd and longs than J.J. McCarthy. So he was their best player. Their most talented player was their quarterback, and they had a deep, great defense. Okay. Well, what does Tennessee have? Well, number 1, they're the 17th ranked team in this year's team composite. So you could make this case of like, no, they're not really a national title contender, but their defense is excellent. I already said they're the number 2 scoring defense in the country. Michigan last year was the number 1 scoring defense in the country. So when you've got a great defense, and more specifically a great defensive line, which Tennessee has, you can overcome some of those talent disparities that you might have from an holistic roster perspective as it relates to some of the other teams. And then what's Nico? Nico Iamaleava, guess what he is? He's exactly like J.J. McCarthy in that they are the 2 most talented players on those respective rosters. So you look at the composite and you're like, wait, can Tennessee really do this? And you're like, well, yeah. One, they've got a great defense, just like Michigan had last year. And two, their most talented player is at the most important position, which actually raises the level of all boats. So a great quarterback is like the tide. Here comes the tide. All the boats in the harbor end up raising. And that's why I think Tennessee is a bona fide national title contender. Both JJ and Nico, 5-star players. Let's go back to the bad side. Number 2, bad surprise. Oklahoma's struggles on offense. They have been really bad on the offensive side. I did a deep film review last week after that loss to Tennessee. Now, part of it was that Tennessee is really good. The other part of it is that Oklahoma schematically was just horrific in that game. There's no other way to put it, by the way. There's legitimately no other way to put it. Their protection plan was all over the map. Their run game plan was all over the map. They could not target defenders in the run front. Like it was bad. It was bad for OU. And now we're sitting here with like this quarterback dilemma. So Oklahoma is 121st in the country in total offense this year. They're averaging under 300 yards per game. This is an offense, by the way, that was supposed to take off with Jackson Arnold, five-star quarterback, a bunch of really talented wide receivers. Arnold's now been benched. Nick Anderson has barely played. Jaden Gibson was lost for the year in fall camp. The offense was a disaster against Tennessee in their opener in the SEC. That led to a quarterback change. Now you got Michael Hawkins in there, and guess what? They still, even though, like, guys, they should not have beaten Auburn. Like, Auburn gave them that game. And to me, like, the offense wasn't much better against Auburn. Under 300 yards again. They were fortunate they got that pick 6 late in the fourth quarter in order to win the game. Again, Auburn kind of handed them the game. So Oklahoma really should be sitting here with 2 losses, and their struggles on that side of the ball have, to me, just been a huge surprise. I thought Jackson Arnold was going to be a better fit schematically for the players that they had on the outside, and it just hasn't materialized. Just hasn't materialized at all. Number 1 good surprise in college football. Are you ready? Can we drum roll it? Joy to the world. Number 1 good surprise, true freshman overachieving. Can we just sit back and appreciate the fact that we have true freshmen all over the country that are legitimately some of the best players in college football? I have been absolutely loving watching these guys both live and on film. We've got Ryan Williams at Alabama. We've got Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. And we've got maybe the best of them all, Jeremiah Smith out of Ohio State. They all came in with 5 stars, and yet somehow they're overachieving for fan bases that have huge expectations. These catches that you're watching on YouTube from Jeremiah Smith were ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. This guy could be the best Buckeye of all of them. And we've just seen, 4 or 5 of some of the better college receivers in the sport all go to the NFL and have a ton of success as they've navigated their way to the National Football League. And to a man, they'll all sit there and they'll say, like, hey, this guy might be even better than the rest. Ryan Williams, similarly, huge fan base, monstrous expectations in the state. The guy's been the Gatorade Player of the Year since he came out of the womb in high school in Alabama, and he's done nothing but impress, exceeding expectations. He just put on a show against Georgia. He is only 17, which I know everyone knows now, and they're going to start to roll their eyes, but he's not even close to 18 yet. He doesn't turn 18 until after the season is over in February. Like, what? Guy can't even vote. He's out there dominating college football. He's the highest rated wide receiver recruit that Bama has had since Julio Jones, and he's produced like Julio already. Again, massive expectations, and then he has exceeded those. That is so rare in this day and age where we're hyper involved and in tune with recruiting. Fan bases celebrate these commitments. You get out there, and Hayes Fawcett is throwing out his graphics, and man, like, Everybody knows these guys, and these guys are meant to come in and be the greatest and all that. They've exceeded expectations. Dylan Raiola, same way. He's not only just meant to come in there and like, hey, you've got to start as a true freshman. He's supposed to be the program's savior at Nebraska. And I understand that they lost against Illinois, but he's the reason why they're in position to continue to compete in the Big Ten. He's the reason why this turnaround is happening at Nebraska. He's the best player on the field for Nebraska. Matt Rule will say that and has in a lot of interviews. Nebraska's 4-1. He's way ahead of schedule. Before the year, I said that he just needs to be a net positive, not a net negative. He's way more than that. He's the reason their offense is dangerous. And in a lot of ways, they need to catch up to Dylan Raiola. These three guys have been just a breath of fresh air. True freshmen that come in with massive expectations and exceed them. I mean, kudos. Number one surprise of the first month of the college football season, Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith, Dylan Raiola. Whew. I remember going into the spring game last year at Ohio State. So we were going in there to televise that game. And I had watched some of the practice film. And I thought, man, this guy is really good. And the coaches were like, yeah, he might be the best of all of them. And I was like, hold on a second. I just watched Marvin Harrison Jr. I just watched Jackson Smith-Njigba and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Terry McLaurin. And like, come on, guys. Like, he can't be better than all of those guys. And he's probably better than all those guys. That's unreal. Jeremiah Smith is an absolute show, man. He's just an absolute show. Every time he plays, I want to watch. I'd buy a ticket to watch him play. That's the biggest compliment I can possibly pay a player. All right, we've got to end on the number one bad surprise. I know that, like, I would love to talk about those freshmen forever, but we do have to get to the number one bad surprise. And I think everyone knows where I'm headed with this, right? What's going on at Florida State? Hello? What are we doing? This was a top 10 team in the preseason, and they're nowhere to be found. I mean, like, nowhere to be found. They just got housed by SMU, the team that is not taking a dime to be in their conference. The team that's boosters are flipping the bill to pay for everything just so they can play in the ACC on the ACC network. And then they host the team that just won the conference, felt like they got snubbed from the college football playoff, and SMU houses them. What is happening at Florida State? All's gone wrong. Losses to Georgia Tech, Boston College, Memphis, and SMU. Like, what? Now they've got Clemson this week, and like, there's no chance. I mean, I'm telling you right now, like, if Florida State wins this week against Clemson, that will be the most shocking result in all of college football, because up to this point, it has not even been close. DJU is now going to be out with a broken finger. Brock Glenn is going to start against Clemson. Their next three is against Clemson, 5-0 Duke, at Miami. They could be starting 1-7. In fact, likely. Remember now, it's not just like, oh yeah, those games. They've lost to Georgia Tech, Boston College, Memphis, and SMU. And you're expecting them to win any of the next three against Clemson, a 5-0 Duke team with Manny Diaz, and number 8 Miami on the road, by the way. 1-7 is like, bang, right here. We're staring down the barrel, Florida State, at 1-7. 1-7. By the way, Cal had the lead in the fourth quarter in the one game that they ended up winning. Cal very easily could have won that game. 8 losses is the most by a preseason top 10 team ever. They're going to give that a run. In fact, I kind of think that they're going to lose 9 games. They also have to have a road game against Notre Dame late in the year. Sorry. And when you lose to Boston College, Memphis, and SMU, like, you can lose every game on your schedule. They've got North Carolina coming up. Like, maybe they can beat North Carolina. I think that this is going to be probably a 3-9 team. I think 3-9 is where I'm landing. I think 3-9 Florida State, after being top 10, easily the number one bad surprise in all of college football. Nobody expected this, and it's wild. And Mike Norvell's buyout is like $65 million, by the way. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.